You're listening to Procurement 6, the weekly podcast from the team at Art of Procurement that summarizes this week in procurement in just 6 short segments.
Hi there, I'm Philip Heitzen, and today is Friday, December 15th, 2023.
6.
So we moved into a new house last Monday, and it's a big milestone on the AOP journey. For me, certainly, as we sold up and we rented for over 5 years to be able to invest in growing AOP where it is today. For that, I'm very thankful to the AOP community every day that we're able to take this next step and buy a new place. And yeah, there's been a lot that's gone into moving over the last few weeks. As you can imagine, we've contracted with many suppliers during the moving process. Movers, truck rental, cleaners, furniture companies, power washers, pest control, and a lot more. Now, some of those suppliers, they performed right as expected. Others went above and beyond the call of duty, and others didn't follow up on their commitments. And so this tip of the week for this week is inspired by those that actually let us down over the last week or two. Now, it's a reminder really that communication is the key to setting and managing expectations when problems do occur. The suppliers that anticipated problems and communicated them meant that we could work around them. Those that didn't left us with big problems. So my tip is just a reminder really. When you can foresee problems, whether it's in a big negotiation, it's the timing of a sourcing event, or a supplier sharing bad news, it's always best to communicate this with stakeholders as soon as you can. It's definitely a lesson that I learned the hard way earlier in my career because I'd try and shield my stakeholders, thinking I could fix the problems, thinking that any problems that occurred were my fault, without anybody actually knowing. But openness is always the best approach.
5.
This week on the podcast, we shared a recent AOP Live webinar with Jared Ridgely and Alexander Helwig of Integrity Next, where we dug into the topic of ESG planning for 2024. I asked, as part of the conversation, Alex, if regulations were still a key driver of ESG initiatives.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I believe they're probably the key driver of ESG in many parts of the world. And we shouldn't forget that many of these ESG-related regulations have also been introduced in response to widespread malpractice. So human rights, labor rights, and environmental violations that have occurred within companies' own operations, but obviously largely and increasingly so in supply chains. And I would even say that many, if not most of our customers, they really cite national regulations such as the German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act or the French Supply Chain Act or the Norwegian Transparency Act as the main reasons to approach us, because they really need help in setting up the systems, risk management systems, processes, and data collection procedures in order to be able to tackle all of these legal provisions.
Do you feel like there needs to be, or there will ultimately be, a tipping point where there's enough individual country regulations where those regulations become standard practice, if you will? Like it's easier for an organization to comply across their entire global operations because of certain in-country regulations, as opposed to just looking at this on a country-by-country basis?
I think a country-by-country approach can be very risky because it's very easy to lose track of all the bits and pieces that you may have to consider on a national level. So my hope is that we're moving to a more harmonized approach globally, and that is also something that we're seeing when we look at the most recent regulatory developments. So in terms of ESG related disclosures, for instance, the ISSB has already developed 2 standards, ESG related disclosure standards, which will most likely be adopted by many jurisdictions around the world, even developing countries. And then many of the regulations that are in the works, for instance, at the European level, such as the forced labor regulation or deforestation regulation and the carbon border adjustment mechanism. All of these will have global implications. So many of these topics, they will no longer be confined to single regions, single countries, but they will really apply globally.
It was important to hear that for global businesses, you have to be aware of the regulations across all countries you operate and buy from, and that best practice is going to be to build a global program based on the most stringent regulations that you must comply with.
4.
On Wednesday of this week, US Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell signaled to the market that the Fed was done with this cycle of interest rate increases. The initial reaction from the financial markets has been one of pleasant surprise, at least at the time of recording on Thursday of this week. So where do we go from here? Well, I'm no economist, and there's going to be miles and miles of opinions written from here, but some initial thoughts that I had were that signaling rate cuts even before actually cutting is smart because the mindset shift it brings and will help companies in their longer term planning processes here at the end of the year going into 2024. Now, as procurement teams, I think we're going to continue to face the impact of inflation and cost increase requests. It seems like the Fed is giving up its goal of pegging long-term inflation down to 2%. A lower cost of capital is going to bring more investment into the procurement tech space. That was on hold a little bit earlier in the year, but starting to see examples now of where money is starting to flow back into the procurement tech space. I think that the Fed is betting that in taking these steps, they anticipate a so-called soft landing for the economy, meaning really no recession. Now, historically, most times the Fed has ended its tightening cycle. That's preceded a recession, so time's going to tell if this time really is different. But whether it is or not, I think the only change that I anticipate for procurement is an acceleration of digitization, as companies look for ways to replace additional headcount if we do go into a recession with technology. And last but not least, we've talked on the pod and recently during an AOP live webinar, we'll link to that in the show notes, that procurement is not the first place that technology and specifically generative AI will replace humans across the entire business services spectrum. But that doesn't mean that we're going to be immune to it. So with all that said, I think things are shaping up for 2024 to be another year where procurement agility is high on the agenda.
This is Procurement 6 from Art of Procurement. To get notified every time an episode is published, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe. 3.
In the first Procurement 6 of 2023, I actually featured a piece on the consensus view of where oil prices would end the year. Oil, of course, is a major cost driver for many of the products and even services that we buy. Now, at the start of 2023, oil was $77 a barrel, with a consensus view that it would end 2023 at around $100. Now, with 2 weeks left of the year, we're currently sitting at the $69 to $70 a barrel level. It's a big difference from that consensus view. Now, the moral of the story, take the beginning of the year opinions on commodity price movement that you're going to hear over the next few weeks with a grain of salt. Instead, look just to make sure that you have pricing mechanisms in place that protect you against or help you take advantage of any big swings in price should they occur either to the upside or downside in 2024.
2.
Registration is now open for our first digital event of the year, Digital Outcomes 2024, which will take place on February 28th. In Digital Outcomes, we focus on how to drive outcomes and impact from investment in digitization. It's not about all the bells and the whistles, the features and the benefits, but about how to use digitization as a tool to elevate procurement's impact. We're finalizing the agenda as we speak, but you can register and join over 100 of your peers who have already done so for free by going to artofprocurement.com/digital outcomes. That's artofprocurement.com/digital outcomes. And remember, by registering, even if you're not able to attend on the day, you'll get immediate access to all sessions as they have completed in our event technology.
1.
Now, this is the last Procurement 6 of the year, and I want to end just by thanking all of our listeners for joining us in 2023. In 2024, we want to continue to evolve and grow Procurement 6, and we're always open to feedback. You can always connect with us on social media or by emailing contact@artofprocurement.com. That's contact@artofprocurement.com. And we'd love to hear any thoughts, perspectives, ideas you have for how we can make Procurement 6 even more impactful. In the meantime, we have a couple of special wrap-up episodes that are coming your way before I kick off 2024 with some thoughts on how we continue to elevate the impact of procurement into the next year.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back next Friday at 6 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time. If you've enjoyed this pod, help us grow and tell your peers to search for Procurement 6 wherever they get their podcasts.